Hi, friends. Kathryn Korostoff here from Research Rockstar. And today I'm having a conversation with one of my favorite researchers, Jim Newswanger, who he and I have been having a lot of conversations recently, especially about AI in market research. And Jim, our conversations have been so interesting. I really wanted to record one to share with our student community. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Catherine. Welcome. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Now, just before I started recording, you actually made a really interesting statement about how things are changing in our field because of AI and the variety of changes taking place.
Yes, and I think I've felt it every day this year, uh, and more as the year has progressed. And I've been almost thinking what actually kicked it off as the year of AI. There's certainly the progress of OpenAI as a company, and the prominence of the CEO there is one of the things. But it's obviously been stewing in the background for a while. But you and I were talking about how much it affects the entire life cycle from end to end of. Well, I'll stick to primary market research here for a moment. The traditional sense of developing an original instrument, usually maybe an online survey, but it could also be for a moderator's guide for a focus group, and how some element of AI has kind of introduced itself to help along the way of every stage, whether it be the creative brief, the instrument design, the data cleaning, and certainly the analysis, and certainly the analysis of text has been here this year. And just as one other glaring example that I've been running into a lot is supplementary help with the presentation formatting. Um, that's not to say that these tools are necessarily running away with everyone's jobs, but they're certainly facilitating speedier uh, task completion for certain rote parts of work, certain parts of work that require a lot of tedious or repetitive things that would consume time, and obviously raising the value chain on what is expected of your average market insights professional when management looks and says, well, we don't need you to do this. We can just have AI tool XYZ do this for us, and let's move to a higher order value of work. It almost seems like there's a commoditization process occurring within each stage of the life cycle of market research. I just realized that slowly I think that is occurring.
Mhm. I think that's really interesting. And what I love about this is that I think that when I first started looking at AI and started testing some tools and things that were specific for market research, that my first feeling was, wow, what a huge time saver this can be. But now the longer I'm looking at things, I also am seeing the opportunity for it to actually help us increase the quality. So I love your point that, if we get rid of the mundane stuff, or if we can automate through AI a lot of the mundane stuff, yes, it frees us up to hopefully get to do more of the critical thinking, the analysis, the writing, really strategic thinking about how we're packaging and delivering results, working with business decision makers to translate research into real business decision making, but also actually helping us with some of that value add, not just freeing us up for it, but also helping us with it. In fact, earlier today, I talked to somebody who shared that her team is actually using ChatGPT. Now, don't throw up on this, to write recommendations for research reports. Now, the reason why I don't want you to throw up on this is because I know, like, we all worry, like, okay, is ChatGPT is what it's making as a conclusion or recommendation actually correct, and how am I going to verify it, and or is it hallucinating or whatever. But the point that she was making is that it's not necessarily that it's giving recommendations that they would put as is into a client presentation. It was more making sure that they weren't just going with their personally potentially biased conclusions and recommendations. Like they did their own, they got another set from ChatGPT, and then they said, ooh, that's got a couple of points there we didn't think of.
Yes, certainly. The And the bias point is certainly one that I could probably talk about for the next hour as well. But there is
Human bias or computer bias?
both, and there is a both a pro and a con to the bias conversation in AI, where if you're not careful, you can bias the data, or if you are very careful, you can non-bias the data. So it can work both ways. Um, but I think it's certainly interesting that the idea of getting some type of head start on what might be said as the final product is now greatly enhanced by these automated tools. If you're working what some people call large language model, but in a self-contained research project, if your working body of text is material you generated and are looking at, you're less likely to have hallucinations. And if there is bias, then it's inherently part of the data set itself, and that's another story. But in some of these other large language models, it's quite interesting because I think we're going to move to a system where it's not just about the large language models that are fueling ChatGPT per se, but there are going to be industry validated large language models or large data models, probably through synthetic data models that can be proprietarily, if that's a word, used in individual sectors to be like the definitive word on what do we think about financial services delivery or insurance or government services. There's amazingly a lot of research companies sitting on proprietary monstrous databases of qualitative text information, you name it, encyclopedic information that has heretofore not been indexed into a large language model that essentially makes them the authoritative source that can be loaded into their own proprietary large language model and do much more wonderful work than what we're getting right now from generative AI models, where we do worry about the authenticity, veracity, etc., of the tool.
Now,
Um,
can I interject though? I have a question for you.
sure.
So so there is this idea like ChatGPT obviously is informed by masses of data that may not always be the best quality data. We can't be
Right.
sure. And so
Mostly
that's why we
Wikipedia.
so yeah, so we do know that there's some issues there. But if I'm using one of the systems, and the ones I've seen so far that really just use your own data, are obviously paid systems. How much data do they need for it to be effective? Like, if you are just did a couple hundred, projects in the last 5 years that you could upload, is that enough data for it to be able to make some of those, connections and patterns and themes to add value now when analyzing the next data set?
It depends on the specific research question. In general, the way people are currently talking about generative AI or chat GPT tools, it needs massive amounts of data in order to run through. In the background of these systems, there are a zillion calculations and computer things going on behind the scenes, which is one of the issues with kind of the economic efficiency and energy efficiency of ChatGPT in and of itself. It burns a lot of energy doing this background work that we're completely, not cognizant of. It just happens miraculously in the background, and poof, there it is on our screen. But I think again, it depends on the research topic and what you need as the source content. For general questions, tell me what's going on in an aerospace research now. ChatGPT can go out there, mine Wikipedia and all sorts of other publicly accessible websites and give you reasonable information. If you're looking though, let's say in the pharma industry and you're working with biologics and you need the up-to-date CDC or FDC, whatever, the ruling bodies that control pharma, you need access to the databases that are being used to evaluate the drug market today and that pipeline, which is not easily accessible without having proprietary information access. But assuming you have it, you can draw conclusions that others can't.
So we know that if we're bringing in our own data to train the system, basically to inform the system, we know we need boatloads of data.
Yes.
And, so if maybe so online panel companies, can they, or I don't know if, I don't know if there's any legal considerations because they are collecting the data on behalf of other
Right.
people. But in theory, I would imagine like some of the big online panel companies would have boatloads of data to train an LLM.
Yeah, here you go, like the debate that's happening in the SAG, the arts community right now. Who owns this material that we never really thought of recycling later as an instructional guide to moving the needle further in whatever direction, whether it's creative or like an advanced body of knowledge that's building on one step after another. it We haven't had rules for this, which in part is one of the reasons why ethical and the ethics of AI has become a conversation um, to have. And I don't have the answers to this either, but it is kind of interesting if you're having some service out there claiming to recreate the songs of Madonna or Lady Gaga or you name your famous singer, and they're like, no, 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 that's my stuff. You can't do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think some of the lawsuits, I can't remember the name of the artists, but there were a couple of fine art artists who
Yes.
are saying that tool was trained using my artwork, and I
Yeah.
did not get permission for that.
Yeah, there've been a couple Supreme Court cases on that, I know. But and it's interesting. One other thing that mostly when we've been talking. It's been to me about text, and of course, the one step above that is assuming it's in English when all text is not necessarily in English, but the variety of data to be analyzed is becoming much more sophisticated in the non-structured uh, data category, meaning, imagery, sounds. I don't know. I heard someone suggest scent might be coming down the pike.
Wow.
I'm like, that's kind of interesting. Um, but it's also very fascinating how things are stepping up in the non-text area. And the first thing that's come to mind for me is actually how tables and charts in market research, a visual item, can actually be analyzed by a chat GPT or a GPT like tool, because that is basically a simplistic form of imagery, not usually heavily designed, but there can be some design in research visualizations, particularly when visualization is being emphasized so much on scorecards or in whatever sense that pictures speak a thousand words. But what do you do about that when you run into that in research reports or text that's being analyzed to make sense of something? How does the machine deal with both the text of it and the imagery or graphics of it? Not to mention if there's sound, like an interview.
Mm. Right. So it's all these. So in market research, we have all these different types of potential data inputs. We could have structured data, unstructured data. The unstructured data might be text, image, sound, scent, craziness. I suppose it could also be facial analysis,
Yes,
potentially, right? And so there's all these different types of it almost feels like a little bit of a one-armed bandit where it's mixing and matching all of these potential data inputs to all these different data outputs that you could potentially be getting. Because at first when you say, oh, using AI-based tools to related to images with market research, my first thought is, oh, using AI tools to visualize the data that you're pulling in. But your point is actually also that it could be an AI tool that is actually bringing in the visualization as its input and creating something from that, which I think is really interesting.
exactly, exactly. Really interesting. The other thing that comes to mind is when I was initially starting the conversation, I was thinking very much like what I usually do, which is primary market research, usually in the form of a survey, maybe a focus group. But the research industry is so vast in what people are actually doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's competitive intelligence reports, general desk research,
Mhm.
mock trial analysis. there are so many niches within the market research industry that can find particular uses of these tools within ChatGPT. Not everybody needs to necessarily worry about every step in the funnel of the traditional online survey development process. It could be, there's a lot of different niches that fall within market intelligence research overall. And just being, for example, a competitive intelligence specialist, I would imagine having access to, let's say, every analyst report in the case of finance or tech that you can get your hands on, putting it into a model, in addition to what's already in large language models, can do a lot of work for you to start off with producing a good CI report.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And like you said, some of that work is normally just extremely mundane. That desk research work can be incredibly mundane. I want to go back to a point that you made earlier about how AI tools are available now that are helping us and have potential to help us even more at every stage of the research life cycle.
Right.
So using survey research as an example, how early in the process, right? So a client comes to me with objectives that are not quite as clear as they can be to be operationally useful. They're just, maybe it's a client who's not used to doing this kind of work, or they've just got so much going on that they haven't had the time to really put the clear thinking into it. um, how might we use AI at that point? Is there a use case for actually having an AI tool help us to clarify research objectives as the first step?
I would say yes, definitely. I feel like I've been doing that for a while before we even heard of AI in the last couple of years. I mean, beginning with what was, I guess, called social media analysis. And again, without getting into the sampling rigor usually necessary, analysis of social media, kind of an elementary form of generative chat or generative text analysis, is a great way of starting initial exploration of what's being said about a particular topic or what's known about a topic that can inform where we're going with said, research proposal or creation of said either client brief or our RFP response to a client brief. But I almost always am looking for what's already known about this subject before we go, not necessarily in a bad way, before we go reinvent the wheel, which may be very deliberative, or we might want to say, wait a minute, do we really want to reinvent the wheel here?
Right, right. No, I love that. And I also really appreciate your point about the social media research. We've been doing social media research, thematic analysis on social media research, doing sentiment analysis on social media research now for, gosh, at least 7 or 8 years, I think, that I remember doing it. And this does definitely feel like sort of the next iteration of that. And that was always the benefit I found was, not that I want to say that these tools replace in-depth interviews or focus groups, but in cases where I might be, the researchers got a speed challenge, they need to do something quickly and they need to, generate some hypotheses. We're going to be doing a project on electric vehicles and demand deterrence. And I want to, quickly identify 50 hypotheses about potential demand deterrence to people, keeping them from buying EVs. Would be a really, I would have done it in social media research. And now this is just sort of the next step to see if I can, again, I don't want to say I'm replacing standard qualitative research, but in cases where it might be feasible and where time and money are an issue, it's certainly better than nothing.
Yeah, um, most definitely. And it's amazing how not only can these tools help create the initial draft, as
So
we
getting from,
already
okay, using it for the hypotheses and then actually having it draft the instrument.
exactly. And there's other sophisticated tools that actually allow you to create competing models known as GANs, generative argumentative networking. So
Ah,
you can actually produce two reports of the same thing and say which one is better. Go
I
figure.
love that.
So we've used it a little bit in what we used to call the new hackathon. Um, so have the computers fight themselves. May the best computer end up standing.
Right? It's like graphic design. Like a good graphic designer never just sends you like a one version of your logo, right? They send you 10 versions and
Great example. Yes,
right?
great example. I mean, and I've never really thought of doing that same kind of thing with research findings. Usually there is like, this is our point of view on the research findings, but imagine, let's put forth 5 different potential viewpoints on what the research findings mean. Pick one.
Yeah, I
Uh,
love that because I know one of the things that it's so easy for all of us to fall into is like, you're doing a big project, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, and you're wrapping up the results and you're writing your conclusions and you've identified your patterns and your themes and making recommendations. It's very easy for us to assume that our first crack at that is great, you know. Whereas I know as an experienced researcher and an experienced writer, sometimes it's like the seventh or eighth recommendation idea I come up with. It's actually where that's the gold, you know?
yeah, I often think some of that is self-imposed or client-imposed based on time crunches. That if we only had the time, energy, and kind of like the motivation that needs to come with every research project to, I'm going to get to this now, and a certain amount of creative juice that's necessary to produce that final run. But the time crunch can really sometimes work against us. But I think this, in some ways, fr- hopefully frees up a little bit of time. And on the other hand, I'm a little worried that it might, the more people know about what's going on here, their expectations about how fast things are delivered go in the other direction. So that's
Yeah.
kind of a balance there.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. We definitely don't want people thinking that it's entirely automated because obviously there always has to be human
Right. Right.
checking and writing and context that the machine may not know, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
I've been just an aside. I've been debating in my own head whether artificial intelligence is really the right way to call this Uber field. And I was like, well, maybe it's not really intelligence, but it is knowledge. But I've now become more comfortable in saying artificial. It really is artificially generated. It needs a real human body expert to look at this and say, here's where the value is. The machines are frankly dumb. They do what they're told to do repetitively, and that's it.
yep, yep. And anybody who's played with Chat GPT, even just as a writing tool, knows that it makes mistakes all the time. You know,
Exactly.
I mean, anytime that I've asked it to write something for me, I've had it rewrite it like 7 to 10 times in a row with each one with a new like, okay, it needs to be more this, or you dropped this piece of content that was important, or I really want to make sure that we're addressing this particular angle. But of course, it generates the next version so quickly. Um, so so going back to the sort of at the highest level, this idea that it does seem like we've got the beginning of the research life cycle is like a slam dunk. There's so many ways that whether it's using Chat GPT or more private systems or proprietary tools, um, that there's a lot that we can do in order to fine tune our objectives, identify hypotheses, identify things that will help us to inform instrument design or sampling, and then potentially even creating the instrument, or at least drafts of the instrument that we can work with. What about after we've collected our data? So we've got the data, and again, sticking with primary research, but quant or qual. Now there's different tools that are promising to do different types of analysis. I want to put the text analysis to the side because I feel like we all like that's known. Like we've all seen a lot of improvements in text analysis over the last few years, whether it's analyzing text from open-ended responses and surveys or analyzing text from transcripts to do the thematic analysis, et cetera. What about from structured data though? Because I had read some papers on Google Scholar, which make me sound so much smarter than I really am. I swear, it's just I find Google Scholar to be a really fascinating source of new ideas.
Yeah.
Um, but I bumbled through a few papers from universities about data to text, where the idea is that you're actually uploading structured data or raw data from structured instruments, and that it is generating summary text. It's actually summarizing it. It's like you know we always think, oh, I've done a survey. Now I'm going to do my banner tables or my max diff or my whatever, and then I'm going to write my analysis. And it's, the promise of some of these tools is that you're going to go from raw data to actually a meaningful text-based summary using these AI tools. And I did look at, I only tried one. I looked at a few. I only personally actually tried one where I actually tried to upload data. And I found it very difficult because I wasn't able to figure out. Now, granted, I didn't give myself a ton of time with the tool. I spent maybe 2 hours on it total over a couple of different times. I wasn't able to define for it precisely enough what my data file was. So I uploaded a raw data file, but I couldn't, when I was trying to give it my data labels, like, okay, on this variable, a 1 is very dissatisfied and a 5 is very satisfied, or whatever it was that was my structure. I had a really hard time doing that. And so while I was able to get other aspects of the analysis to work, I actually wasn't able, and again, could be user error, I wasn't able to get that to work. I'm wondering if you've had any experiences with the actual analysis of raw data.
I have, and none would I say were successful final work products. But this does, you said a kind of magic word to me, and that is variable labels or identifying what the data means or is. First of all, this is a variable. What kind of scale is this, etc. And this is the place where you start to make me think about synthetic data, because one of the properties of said synthetic data is pre-labeled. Meta tag maybe is a way of thinking about it for people that know what meta tagging is. The data comes with the label already there, saying this is a proper noun. This is a number or representing income or money. This is or currency. This is a temperature. This is a response to a scale, a Likert scale, whatever. So the system knows in essence what it might do and can then make some decision about what type of analysis is appropriate here. Now, I know there are tools that some people are claiming can do this. I have not run into one that has perfected this, but I believe that on the serious scientific end, one of the ways in which synthetic data is being experimented with as model data is that it is pre-labeled and tests are being run on just how to use this model data for high stakes things like fraud detection, medical analysis, some of the things that are really, I think, top of the line for people in let's get a machine to do this fast because it's high value work. With the high value meaning money or lives are at stake. Um, but to answer like the basic original question, no, I haven't found a tool that does that. But yeah, I'm definitely thinking of it. And also, whoa, when that tool does come along, then really what are we going to do next?
Yeah, yeah, and and again, in any reasonable time frame, I can't imagine that we would work out all the problems with it in terms of really being able to make sure that it's doing the work correct, accurately, and thoroughly. And then the other thing is, I guess because maybe in some circles the idea of data to text is a little bit, sort of like it's kind of new and edgy in certain circles. I think that there are some companies out there that are positioning their marketing using the phrase data to text, but then when I actually look at the tool, almost without exception, they are all actually unstructured data. It's really it's really text analytics basically. It's
Yeah,
not really use of structured data in inputting
yeah,
structured data.
I
Um,
I would agree with based on the ones that I've seen is mostly stuck to that concentrated area.
yeah.
Um, but it's certainly going to be an interesting development. I've been immediately there and having a couple people propose to me in some of the early generative AI work that I've done is how are we going to deal with different research papers that have tables and charts in them? The system doesn't know what to do yet with that information. It knows how to analyze the text, but it can't make sense of what, let's face it, in a lot of scientific papers or market research presentations, as scientific papers, there is a lot of visual display of tables, charts, or you name your graphic, scatter plots, perceptual maps, etc. They all basically need their own little instruction guide to tell the machine how to analyze it.
So, it's funny because, and I know you know a ton more about AI than I do, but I remember when we first started hearing about AI, I got over 10 years ago, God, probably more than 15 years ago now, if I think about it. Um, it was very Boolean, right? It was like a lot of like it was like systems that used like just really complex tool sets, was my understanding. Um, and I almost feel like we need like the best of both worlds for some of our work in market research. Like I want to be able to benefit from the large language model um, knowledge, right? I want to leverage that, but I also want to be able to add a front end or a processor of some kind that makes sure that it also adheres to my rules and my best practices.
I love that word Boolean and your introduction of it. Remember when we were using Booleans as our kind of advanced analytic driver. And it's just another application example area that I have recently been exposed to is the behemoth of the employment industry, LinkedIn, and the way in which they have leveraged analytics around talent, mostly for HR purposes, but the way in which information has been labeled and can now be analyzed in the talent industry for either composite reports on what's going on at individual companies, in individual verticals, in individual skill professions, and quantified and analyzed using basically an AI tool, and the way in which they are supplementing their different AI engines that aid in your analysis is really amazingly transformative and interesting. Um,
Wow.
and I'm not sure most people even know about the back end of that, which can be used by HR departments and employees to actually look at how to profile entire categories of knowledge base. Again, based on what people are inputting into LinkedIn, but it's basically the new what do they call that agency of the government that takes keeps track of the labor? It's kind of like a new Department of Labor.
Oh, Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
it's actually a challenger to them, I think.
And I love BLS. They publish so much interesting data for
Yes,
free.
in certain industries, particularly tech focused, it
Yeah,
really seems like a valid challenger to what's known there.
that is just amazing.
Yeah,
That is just
um,
amazing. Phew. Well, Jim, we're making my head spin. Like,
a
and I,
lot of things to talk about.
yeah, and I love it, and I like the framing of like it really can be. There are tools that exist that can touch every stage of the primary research project lifecycle. My feeling right now is probably mostly doing a better job in the front end than at the end of it
Agreed.
at this point. But clearly things are just are moving so rapidly. Um, so I think that it's definitely an interesting thing. I remember back years ago when online surveys first came out. I don't know. I've had this conversation with a few people, Jim. So pardon me if you and I have already had this one. But the whole idea of like when online surveys first came out, there was like all of this concern and the profession about how this was going to just destroy data quality, and it was going to be terrible, and there was a lot of hand wringing and a lot of people being upset, and clearly there are issues, right? Like we all know that there's issues with panel quality. We know that there's issues with bots. There are definitely issues that have existed and are now newer, but clearly it's become the standard, you
Yeah,
know.
I think you and I may have been talking about this before because I was relaying a memory from, I don't know, more than 10 years ago at an annual APOR conference meeting where there was a very vibrant discussion, literally debate about the validity of this new thing called online research. Lo and behold, shortly thereafter, every major market research firm in the country, if not the world, was in online research. we, we had
Yeah,
Harris Online, Gallup
yeah.
Online, etc. So it's all, and interesting. We didn't talk about this, and just maybe for another day, the one other fascinating thing that AI is also being used for is in the programming area, code. So for you can now actually get a AI tool to take your survey instrument and code it as an online survey. So for all of that, I don't want to do this programming to set this up and name your survey platform. There is now code that will write in Python or choose your programming language, your survey, and dump it into your survey tool, and presto, online surveys ready. Which I've been yay.
Yeah, talk about the mundane. I'm really glad you brought up that example because one of our other instructors is Jeff McKenna, who does a lot of segmentation work and product concept testing work. Another one of my absolute favorite researchers. And he and I were meeting in person and we were talking about AI and Chat GPT. And he pulled up a window and he said, watch this. And he said, I want to design a max diff survey with on this category with these attributes or attribute levels or however he had his list set up. And he gave it a couple parameters like, 3 items per task or whatever, like you would normally do if you were using like Sawtooth or something like that, right?
Right.
And it wrote the questionnaire and gave him the code for it. And I was just like, that's insane. Now, when we looked at it, we definitely saw things we needed to improve. Like if this had been a real thing, we would have improved it. But how, I mean, just on one iteration of it, it was really good.
I totally get it. I need to edit anything that's done that way, but the fact that it can just generate, even if you want to call it a first draft of text or code, I'll take it because it gets out of the roteness business and into what I already am going to have to do, and that's edit, if not once, twice, anything that's going to be seen in a large survey environment on glass.
Amazing. That's
Yeah,
awesome. So a fun time to be in market research. Then the next
yes,
topic, and I know we need to wrap it up, but something that, all of this kind of brings up to me is like, there's been in parallel to new AI-based tools coming into the research world, of course, the last few years, we've also seen the research world changing in terms of how it intersects with other data-driven functions within the organization. So a lot of companies have market research and insights, and they have customer analytics, and they have CX, and they may have 2 or 3 other silos that are collecting data that's either transactional about customer behavior or that is attitudinal or experience-based. And so I wonder, with AI coming out, are we going to see changes in how organizations structure these functions? Is the actual organizational structure going to change because of efficiencies, possibilities of breaking down some of these silos in the future? Like, is AI, in 10 years, is there going to be a market research and insights function or a CX function? Is it going to be something else now?
yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess I can speak to that somewhat directly coming from IBM, where obviously research occurs in all business units and contexts, both at the corporate functions level and then within the business unit. And it's almost as if we need a really smart chief research officer. Not, I mean, we do already have a chief research officer for the purposes of bench research and discovery of, quantum computing and other, but I'm talking about the market intelligence, customer insights area for that kind of research, which is done so across the board, so matrix and in so many different functions. In there is not one person at a senior level that says, wait a minute, we need to bring this together. I think it started somewhat with chief data officers, but that focus has not been about market research and insights. That's been more about how can we get a handle on our data lake and our
BI
customer data.
data. Yeah,
It's
it's yeah,
the chief data officer, as it's known now, is not a market insights professional, but
right.
there you could argue whether the executive board wants to adopt it or not, but you could make a really valid argument with this increasing attention on this level of insight and newness that it is valuable to have a senior person looking after the broader perspective of how to bring these things together.
Right. I love that. And it could be the mix of primary data, first party data, third party data, so many different types of data that we have. data types and data sources.
Yeah.
Uh, Wow. Okay, Jim, I could talk to you forever. Thank you so
Right.
much for your time. I think we'll wrap it up now. And I really appreciate all of your experience here is really just a great way for us and I think our student community, because I know a lot of people are trying to figure out, okay, there's a certain amount of hype out there, but there's also a certain amount of doomsday out there. So what really is happening? What's current and what are some of the likely futures? So I think that that people will find this conversation helpful.
Great. We're learning every day. Thanks for the opportunity, Kathryn. I enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Conversations for Research Rockstars. This video podcast series is available on YouTube, and if you prefer an audio-only version, please be sure to find us on your favorite podcasting platform. We hope you got value out of today's episode, and if you did, please be sure to review and subscribe. It helps us to reach more research rock stars like you.